All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to now our third installment of the Oregon Community Food Systems Network's Climate Resilience and Stewardship Subgroups Tricky Topic Series. We're excited to be chatting today. This is our third installment. We've covered. Let me pull up my notes here so I make sure I hit everything. We have covered the carbon sequestration tricky topics, soil carbon sequestration in storage. We've talked about Western water law and agriculture and climate intersections. And today we are super excited to be talking about the intersections of climate change and crop insurance on the federal level. So that's this group. This is a subgroup of the Farming for the Future working group of the Oregon Community Food Systems Network. And early this year, we had a convening and we met, and this subgroup met, and we talked about what we would like to do together in this space. And we decided that, hey, let's convene some educational series, some tricky topics, conversations to kind of spur conversations, spur some thought around these really difficult issues at the intersections of agriculture and climate change. My name is Andrew. He use he, him pronouns. I'm the working group coordinator, and our subgroup chair is Megan Kemple here with the with Oregon Climate Ag Network. And yeah, so this is our third installment. We picked this based on the information that in the comments from our convening, and super excited to jump right into it. Megan, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you for coordinating, Andrew. I'm glad to see so many familiar faces and really excited to have Billy share. NSAC is such a great resource and Billy's super knowledgeable on this topic, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, so we were thinking about who we wanted to invite to talk about this climate and crop insurance conversation. We're like, should we get someone from FSA, USDA? And then said, no, let's reach out to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. They can be really candid and about this issue. So we've got Billy Hackett here. He's the policy specialist at NSAC, and holds a BA in political science. And Billy staffs the NSAC Farming Opportunities and Fair Competition Committee, which focuses on key crop insurance, commodity, and competition issues. And I think we'll just jump right into it and hand this over to Billy. Thank you so much for being here. And we're recording this for the network to see in the future. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank y'all for the invitation to speak. I'm really excited that crop insurance was a tricky topic this group wanted to dive into, because it is indeed a complex set of issues, but don't let that stop you from engaging and learning. We're here to break it all down and really drive home how the way this program has been implemented is a key driver of climate change, and how it can, right, also help farmers not only mitigate losses against climate change and protect and recover losses after climate change, but prepare for climate change. So really an intersectional issue here. And so you can dive in a little bit with a grounding of who the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition is, if someone in here isn't familiar. But we're a grassroots alliance of over 130 member organizations from around the country. We work together to improve federal food and farm policy, and we've been doing that for over 30 years, founded in the farm crisis of the 1980s. And so our process is multi-leveled. Again, as a grassroots member organization in Washington, D.C., we set ourselves up in a fairly unique structure. We have farmers and stakeholders on the ground who are experiencing every day the realities of farming, and working with farmers by supporting or providing TA, research, all kinds of capacity supporting roles. And so we hear, right, their experiences, we solicit ideas, and we hear about challenges related to accessing federal policy and the different impact that these policies have on local groups. And so what happens in the field is funneled up to our member organizations. Again, over 130 around the country, organizations that range from groups providing direct technical assistance to groups doing research affiliated with academic institutions to farmer membership groups. And from them, we collect input as key stakeholders on their own experiences and ask them to funnel up what they're hearing from the ground. And all of that comes together at NSAC, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, through a system of committees and working groups where, again, we funnel everything we're hearing up from the ground. And with our members, set nationwide priorities every year, build campaigns, and we strategize how to best bring these ideas to address many of the challenges we hear to the Hill, to Congress, and to USDA and the Biden administration, in this case, any administration. So again, it's a multi-level process from the field to the Hill, and we see ourselves as a facilitator of those voices and experiences. And so let's dive into a bit of a 101 before we get deeper of what the federal crop insurance program, how it functions, what it looks like. The federal crop insurance program is administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Risk Management Agency, RMA. And so it's administered by the federal government, right, who has a big role in designing programs and facilitating implementation of programs. But it's a public-private partnership by design. So crop insurance policies are actually sold by private crop insurance companies. There are 13 approved insurance providers, or AIPs, who sell federal crop insurance policies, and of course, crop insurance agents on the ground who are doing that work. So in theory, right, crop insurance at the most basic level is designed to protect against natural perils, think loss from different weather-related events, etc. And as the program grew, it also grew to include revenue protection, right? So policies that can help protect you against revenue loss and make up the difference in years where you've lost revenue. Generally, again, crop insurance is used to manage risk, and that's a big reason that folks will purchase it. It's also used as collateral for loans. So if you want to take out loans from sometimes FSA or especially commercial lenders, they're going to ask you, do you have insurance or an insurance-like product to use as collateral? And so that's the key barrier to farmers accessing loans, not the primary topic of this webinar, but an intersectional issue. And again, when we think about that public-private partnership, a big role that the federal government plays, and thus the taxpayer, is subsidizing the cost of the federal crop insurance program. And so taxpayers subsidize about 60% of the premium on average that a farmer pays to purchase their crop insurance policy. And taxpayers are also subsidizing these 13 private insurance companies, as well as crop insurance agents for fulfilling that role. And so at every step of the process, taxpayer subsidization is a key mechanism that has upheld this program. And so diving even further in, right, the different kinds of crop insurance policies available for farmers range. The most common crop insurance policies are called multi-peril insurance policies that can be loss against weather, that can be loss against revenue. But your standard crop insurance is probably a multi-peril crop insurance policy. It is available by crop and by county, right? And so that poses a key barrier to a lot of smaller, diversified specialty crop producers, especially if you happen to be in a county where all that's grown around you is corn and beans, right? If you're trying to grow tomatoes in a Montana county where they're only growing wheat, you're not going to have the option to enroll in a multi-peril crop insurance policy for tomatoes because it doesn't exist in your county. No one else is growing it, and the RMA does not have the data to create a policy and to back that up. And so again, that poses a very common and very real barrier to specialty crop farms purchasing crop insurance. And that's where some of these other options come in. There are written agreements where If you're in a county where they don't have a crop insurance policy for your crop, you can create an insurance policy working directly with an agent and with USDA on what's called a written agreement, right? So really tailoring it to that crop in your area, using your production history, etc. It's not a process that many farmers go through, but it's technically an option with its own challenges. The next option is the only crop insurance product that was designed specifically for diversified farms. That's called whole farm revenue protection. And recently an option's been added called the micro farm product pilot. And so whole farm revenue protection, again, designed with diversified farms in mind, in that it ensures the revenue of your entire operation. And so it's not one specific crop that's insured, but your entire operation. And unlike other insurance policies, it's available nationwide. So in theory, you can buy it wherever you are to cover your diversified farm. It includes livestock as well. However, there have been, and we'll get more to this later into the webinar, in implementation, several barriers have come up that prevent diversified farmers writ large and across the country to really enroll in this program according to its potential. And so again, that's a tease, and we'll talk more about the opportunities to address some of those barriers later as we talk about opportunities to reform. And finally here is not an insurance product, but it's an insurance-like product offered by the Farm Service Agency, FSA, called the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program. The acronym is NAP, which doesn't align with the words on the screen, but it's called NAP. And NAP is designed, was stood up before whole farm revenue protection, when there really was, not even in theory, an option for many farms that didn't have an insurance policy designed for them in their county. And so its purpose is to insure crops that don't have insurance available to them. Again, now all farms technically have insurance available to them through whole farm, but NAP continues to be an important option for beginning farmers, especially farmers who don't have between 3 and 5 years of production history or revenue history, which is a requirement to enroll in whole farm revenue protection, and even more years required for other insurance products. So NAP is an opportunity to get you some basic coverage for free, and if you want additional coverage, you can enroll in that buy-up and pay for that. So another option that's available to folks, and that's the existing patchwork of crop insurance policies in a nutshell, not comprehensive. I forgot to say at the top of this, if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I have that open, I'm monitoring it, and I'm happy to address something if it's directly relevant to something I've just named. And there will be space for Q&A at the end if you don't have a question as we're moving. But again, that was a little bit of a crop insurance basics. And so let's dive in a little bit more to the structure and really what the impact has been of the federal crop insurance program, especially in terms of who wins and who loses. And so in theory, the federal crop insurance program is an important safety net that is there to protect farmers against unforeseen loss, right? In practice, it has become a program that picks winners and losers by its design and implementation, and really has channeled resources into the hands of a specific kind of farm over others. And so if we look here, going back to what we were just talking about, right, with taxpayer subsidization of the federal crop insurance program, that has been a key to the federal crop insurance program's success. And so you see before the early 2000s, the federal crop insurance program subsidies, or the federal crop insurance program was not subsidized, and thus enrollment was much lower than it is today. And so in the mid-90s, Congress authorized this premium subsidy or this discount to incentivize farmer enrollment in the federal crop insurance program. And so you see here how that has skyrocketed since the mid-90s into the mid-2000s to where we are today. crop insurance has become an extremely popular product, and in no small part that was incentivized by the premium subsidies. But you can start to see where those subsidies are going and start to see who's really benefiting from the federal crop insurance program when we think about its success. By looking at this chart, which is available in a Congressional Research Service report on the federal crop insurance program that goes much more in depth to everything we're talking about here. But this graph shows us which farms are enrolled in federal crop insurance by acres operated. So you can see the dark blue line is all farms within that range of acres, which is defined on the left-hand side. And the light blue line is all farms within that range who have enrolled in insurance. And so you can very clearly see that most farms by far above 1,000 acres, or really above 500 acres, are enrolled in the federal crop insurance program and do have protection against those unforeseen losses. Farms in that 260 to 499 range, about half of them are insured as well, right? And then when there's a precipitous drop for all farms between 1 and 220 acres, where very few smaller farms and mid-sized farms are actually enrolled in crop insurance, and thus, again, have no protection against rain and floods and droughts and hurricanes and derechos and frosts, all of these disasters we're seeing that are becoming more and more frequent. And so again, another cut of this pie, right, is to look at it, share of premium subsidies by crop. And we can clearly see, again, who has benefited most from the federal crop insurance program. By far, corn growers have received the most taxpayer support to be able to purchase crop insurance, soybeans, wheat, right? The crops that we'd expect. And that gives you another look at who's benefiting most from the federal crop insurance program versus who's left out, right? Not a single specialty crop part of this pie chart. And several commodity crops that are in that other crop category as well. And so that's a challenge in the National Sustainable Agriculture's Coalition view, in terms of who the federal government, again, is supporting to have access to a safety net. When we fundamentally believe a taxpayer subsidized safety net, it's important to help protect farmers, again. But when it does so in a way that incentivizes some folks to have protection and leaves other out, right? That's a flaw in design. And part of that problem is that there are, within the federal crop insurance program, no limitations to payments to farmers, nor are there any means tests to determine eligibility for subsidies. That's different from most, if not all, other farm programs, conservation programs, commodity subsidy programs. They all have a means test that's an adjusted gross income cap, wherein if you have an AGI, adjusted gross income, above $900,000, so effectively if you're a millionaire, you should not receive federal subsidies because you're able to afford enrollment in those programs yourself. And right from the idea that the federal government should help folks who really need that assistance. And they also have payment caps, right? So commodity programs, for example, you cannot receive more than $125,000 per farm or $250,000 per farm in the case of someone with a spouse. There are many loopholes, which we'll talk about later as well, that make those fairly ineffective. But in statute, the intent of Congress is to limit those payments to guarantee money is being spent responsibly. That taxpayer money is going to support folks who need it most. And so without any means tests and without any payment limits, that money is overwhelmingly being concentrated in the hands of the largest and wealthiest farms. And so we can see in this chart here at the bottom that almost 80%, just under 80% of crop insurance premium subsidies have gone to farmers or the top 20% of farms between 2011 and 2019, right? So that's a staggering number. Just about 23%, under 23% of crop insurance premium subsidies have gone to farms, to 80% of farms, right? And so again, we're talking significant concentration of resources in the hands of few farms. And that has pretty severe climate implications when we think about the role that the federal crop insurance program plays. It's become a primary driver of climate change in agriculture. Again, farms that are most resilient, right, that have adopted conservation and soil health building practices and manage their risk on farm, right, they don't get protection through the safety net. They don't have access to these programs. Whereas these programs, and especially in the role that taxpayer support plays in enabling them to do so, artificially removes risk for the largest monoculture commodity farms. It shifts that risk onto the back of the taxpayers. And these farms are inherently more risky when we're thinking about biodiversity, right? The monoculture operation where one pest, one disease can wipe out a farm, right? When we're talking about diversification, where that applies as well, or if we're thinking about market diversification, which we saw during the pandemic, right? If you have one or two buyers in bulk and suddenly supply chain interruptions exist and you can't sell to them, we saw, tons of food rotting in the fields, animals euthanized. And we saw our local communities unable to feed themselves because their infrastructure doesn't exist to get that food to folks who need it. And when we think about soil health, when these heavy tillage, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, etc., monoculture operations, leaving fields fallow, all of this is destroying our soil health. It's killing the natural biomes, reducing nutrients, right? All of those impacts exist on these monoculture farms. And in theory, right, these farmers are experiencing worsening losses in the face of droughts and floods and hurricanes, derechos, dust storms. All of these are going to continue to worsen and create even more expensive losses for farms that are not equipped to manage their risk on farm, but again, rely almost entirely on the taxpayer and rely on the federal crop insurance program to shift that risk. There's no incentive for a farm that is supported by the federal crop insurance program and is supported by commodity subsidies and receives ad hoc disaster assistance to shift their practices in the face of worsening weather events and in the face of increased risk to loss. There's no need to change your business model and adopt those conservation practices because you have a really, really robust system of support. And that perverse incentive is not only bad for climate, it's also bad for farmers' bottom lines, right? It's trapping farmers in a system where they're dependent on all of these very expensive inputs, right? Genetically engineered seeds and pesticides and herbicides, the latest equipment, right? It's bad for farmers' bottom line to continue down this path. But, and it frankly can't be sustained, where we're going to continue to experience worsening losses, more expensive losses. The federal crop insurance program, its cost has more than tripled in 3 years. On average, that cost hovered around $5 to $6 billion in the prior decade. In 2 years ago, that number went up to about $9 billion. Last year, the cost of the federal government crop insurance program increased to about $13 billion. And this year, the cost of the federal crop insurance program is about $18 billion. In just 3 years of worsening weather, we're seeing this program triple in cost. And by Congress, it's authorized to support, or its funding is authorized at whatever means is necessary. Again, there's no spending cap for the program at large, and most of this money, as we've seen and laid out the cases, being concentrated in the hands of the largest and wealthiest farms. And so that can't be sustained. It will become more and more expensive. We're going to need to authorize more ad hoc disaster assistance programs, and fundamentally, there's no incentive for farms to adopt conservation practices. And so how can this program actually help farmers to mitigate risk in the face of growing climate change, How could it even be used to encourage farmers to adopt conservation practices voluntarily or otherwise? Those questions are addressed in this slide. So another fundamental problem to crop insurance access, right, are several rules that actually disincentivize conservation practice adoption. One of those is rules around what's defined as a good farming practice. Long story short, the National Resource Conservation Service has a list of practices defined as good farming practices to govern what conservation practices farmers might adopt on their farms. RMA, the risk management agency which administers the federal crop insurance program, has said, we recognize all the practices that NRCS has identified as a good farming practice as good farming practices for the purposes of the federal crop insurance program, except that practice may not have a negative impact on yields or any impact on yields. And so we know that when you're first adopting a new conservation practice or soil health practice, there's a period of a temporary yield drag, right? As you learn how to adopt that practice to your own land and to the crops that you're working with. In the first few years, you might have or experience lower yields until your soil health builds, right? And until you know what to do. And vis-a-vis RMA's definition of good farming practices, if you were trying to enroll in insurance and adopt one of those conservation practices that caused a yield decline, a temporary yield decline on your farm, you would be denied your indemnity in the case of a loss. So you would be denied a payout. And so that's a fundamental barrier that we've heard farmers or keeps farmers from adopting conservation practices. If they are enrolled in insurance or want to enroll in insurance, they don't want to risk that coverage. And so it's a disincentive to adopt conservation practices that's baked into the program through administrative rules. Another opportunity, right? So there's a need to reform good farming practices to remove that yield provision. Another opportunity to improve the federal crop insurance program for those farmers who are adopting conservation practices. An idea that floats around is for what some folks call the good driver discount, and the way that a good driver sees a discount on their car insurance premiums. A farmer adopting risk-reducing practices could see a discount on their crop insurance premium, right? To more accurately reflect the reduced risk of that farm. And so a proposal floats around, right, to, and actually the administration during the pandemic authorized what's become known as the Pandemic Cover Crop Program, which was modeled after a program implemented in several of the I states in the Midwest, which is a $5 per acre premium discount for adopting cover crops. And so building on that idea, right, there's an opportunity for good driver discounts for crop insurance or a good farmer discount for a menu of regionally appropriate practices, right? Not only cover crops, but, choose what works best for your farm in your region. If you're adopting crop rotations, if you're adopting cover crops, XYZ, you could see a reduced crop insurance price tag is another idea that floats around. A fundamental reform that would be necessary is incorporating climate risk into the risk rating methodology that RMA uses to determine your premium and your payout, et cetera. And so again, in a more fundamental way than just giving you a discount based on your practices, really baking into the program itself that if you are a less risky farm, you pay less for your federal crop insurance, right? And so also, if you are a very risky farm, right, you would be paying more for your insurance, right? And to create a natural market incentive for farmers to adopt conservation practices and to become more resilient, because those farms are more expensive for the program, right? It only makes sense for an incentive to exist for them to make themselves less risky. Another right solution here, this is just general framing, right? Will this program be a program that continues to, be a safety net only, right? And it's much more than a safety net for many farmers as it exists. Or, right, can it be a program that supports farmers in building long-term improved resilience, right? Can it be an actual program that helps farmers to manage their risk on farm, right? To reduce that dependence on taxpayer subsidies, right? And to really encourage farmers to work with their land, work with their soil in a way that benefits everybody. So those are fundamental questions at hand. And so,
Billy, we have a quick question in the chat regarding just a clarifying question on the if a farmer uses the good farming practices and they have a reduced yield, they don't get their payout for losses, right? What's
that's
clarify.
correct if they're enrolled in the crop insurance program. That's correct. You know, depending on how you're communicating with your crop insurance agent and how they're reporting to you know, their corporation, all of those things. But the statute means that what you're saying is true. Thank you for the question. And so that brings us to some opportunities for reform in the context of this farm bill, which was supposed to pass by September 30th, timeline for which is wonky and nobody knows when it'll come. But there are several bills that are moving right now which address some of these, not all of these, but some of these concerns. The first I'd like to highlight is a bill to improve access to the whole farm revenue protection program, which we talked about at the beginning of the session, right? The only product designed for diversified farms. But I alluded to several barriers that have made it difficult for small and diversified farms to really enroll in the program. The program was first authorized or offered in 2015, authorized in the 2014 Farm Bill. And enrollment quickly peaked in 2017 at about 2,700 farms, right? And so a very small sliver, right, of all of the diversified and small farms that exist that need insurance, that deserve a safety net. But still, a fast start for its first 2 years being offered. But since 2017, we've seen about a 45% decline in enrollment in the whole farm revenue protection program. And that's a virtue of several barriers. One, it has traditionally been exorbitant paperwork, wherein farms have needed to report all of their expenses in a given year, right? Which can amount to all of your transactions at, you know, a farmer's market, a farm stand. It's an unreasonable paperwork burden for small and limited resource local regional producers. To address that, 2 years ago, RMA created a micro farm pilot option within whole farm revenue protection that eliminated that expense report requirement. And last year, RMA eliminated the expense report requirement, which was a big win and an important shift for the program. However, what we've heard in this last year of that requirement being removed, farmers continue to be asked for that additional paperwork from their agents. And so that's been a challenge where even if it's no longer required by RMA, agents continue to ask for it. So there's a provision in this act to really clarify, right, that what you need for this program is your Schedule X tax return to be able to show your expected revenue, right, and your real revenue in order to make up that difference and pay you your indemnity. And if the agent needs additional paperwork, they need to show why that tax form is insufficient or fraudulent and explicitly communicate why they're requesting more documents from their farm. So farmers are not just being asked for all these additional documents that they don't need to be providing. With regard to that micro farm option, in its first year, it was offered only for farms with less than $100,000 in revenue. Only about 19 farms enrolled, and it was from its start much too small of a cap. And so last year, RMA raised it to farms with less than $350,000, which captures all farms that USDA defines as small. But this bill, which has been introduced by Senator Brown and co-sponsored by 5 Democrats in the Senate, would raise the microfarm cap to $1 million. So all small and mid-sized farms defined by USDA would have access to this streamlined micro farm product. And so that's an important provision, again, to get more folks in the door and get them the coverage they need. And the next provision addresses right now a limit to expansion that exists in the program. So for those farmers who have been able to enroll, right now, your ability, your revenue can only expand by 35%, and you can be covered for that. But if you are a small farm, a beginning farmer that's doubled your operation, right, from year to year, right, say you had 100% growth, you would only be insured for 35% of that growth. And so that's leaving many small and rapidly growing farms underinsured who have managed to enroll in the program. And so this bill would raise that limit to 100%, or $500,000, the lower of. And in addition to several other provisions which aren't in this bullet list, but these are just some of the key ones, the bill would expand the diversification discount, which I didn't speak to, but again, in line of more diversified farms have reduced risk. This product baked in a discount for that diversification. So right now, if you have less than 7 commodities enrolled in that product, you can see a discount on like 3 to 7 commodities. And so we want that diversification discount raised, right, to give you a discount on, up to 10 or more commodities to really reflect the reduced risk of even greater diversification. And that's to address a challenge some highly diversified farms say, in that the program just isn't worth it because they're so diverse, right, and are able to manage risk that way. So this would really address that. And one of the most fundamental barriers to accessing whole farm revenue protection is farmers' abilities to find a crop insurance agent that's willing to sell it to them. Right now, the federal crop insurance program commission for agents is in part based on the value of the premium. So a much larger conventional farm, right, has a high premium. It's easy for that agent to work with that farmer. Presumably they've had a relationship for many years. They know what to expect. They can write that policy very quickly. It's cookie cutter. And it's a smart business decision for them to do that. But it's not a smart business decision for agents to take all the additional time to learn this highly complex policy in whole farm revenue protection, and to find small and specialty crop and diversified farms, and tailor this product directly to them. And at the end of the day, they'll have a much smaller premium because of their size. That isn't worth it for the crop insurance agent to go through all that effort. And so that's been a fundamental barrier to agents offering the program. We've heard of many farmers who have pulled up every crop insurance agent in their region and called every single one, and agents have said, I don't know enough about the program, so education is another issue, or have said, I don't want to sell it, or not answered at all. And so to address this fundamental barrier, because you can't access insurance if you don't have anyone to sell it to you, the bill would add additional compensation for agents who sell whole farm revenue protection. So effectively a bonus to agents who go out of the way to sell the program, to really level that playing field and to create some kind of incentive for agents, or at least combat the disincentive for agents to sell whole farm. So those are some of the key provisions in this bill, and it's a pivotal bill to improve access to insurance for small and diversified farms. Next is a bill called the Ensuring Fairness for Family Farmers Act, introduced by Senator Booker and Representatives Salinas and and Blumenauer, both Oregon representatives. This bill would address that disincentive for agents to sell insurance policies because it's based on the value of a premium to small farms and diversified farms by changing the metrics to determine agent compensation. So instead of being tied to value of the premium, this bill would change compensation for insurance agents to be based on complexity, right? So to consider things like the number of crops, the type of policy, the number of policies that you hold, whether or not you've been insured, right? And so in determining all of those factors, it also affords a 10% bonus to agents who sell to previously uninsured farms under 180 acres, and some specialty crops, right? And so really incentivizes selling to farms who are underinsured, who don't have insurance right now, who are growing specialty crops, and small farms. And the bill includes some data transparency measures for subsidies, right? So who is receiving subsidies in terms of private insurance companies and agents. This next bill would help beginning farmers access insurance It's been introduced by Representatives Feenstra and Craig in the House and Senator A.B. Klobuchar in the Senate, the Crop Insurance for Future Farmers Act. Right now, all USDA agencies for all programs recognize beginning farmers as all those who have been farming less than 10 years. That's standard. But the Risk Management Agency, RMA, only recognizes beginning farmers as those farming less than 5 years. And so to bring this definition in line with all other USDA agencies, this bill would bring RMA's definition of beginning farmer up to 10 years. And that's important because there exists a 10% premium discount for beginning farmers right now. This bill would also raise that 10% premium discount to a total of 15%. That scales down to 10% after your first few years. And so that is a bill moving to help beginning farmers access insurance. Again, the whole farm bill, right, would remove barriers to access insurance at all, right? This bill is helpful, right, if you have an insurance agent who's willing to sell to you and if you're able to find an insurance product that works for you, but certainly will help beginning farmers if cost is a specific issue. And here is a bill to address the real structure of crop insurance subsidies that we were discussing earlier. So Representative Blumenauer of Oregon has introduced this bill now. Very recently, Senator Shaheen has introduced historically in the Senate, along with Pat Toomey, a Republican of Pennsylvania, who has recently retired. But this bill is called the Assisting Family Farmers Through Insurance Reform Measures Act, the AFFIRM Act. And it's poised to save up to $35 billion over 10 years. And that is through payment limitations and means tests for crop insurance premium subsidies. The House version that Representative Blumenauer just introduced includes a $125,000 cap on crop insurance premium subsidies. So a farmer can still receive $125,000 every year in a discount for purchasing that crop insurance, which is a lot of money. Still receive that big discount. And that cap would only impact less than 1% of farms. And it would save almost $8 billion alone. This next provision is a means test of $250,000. So a much more strict means test than exists for commodity programs or conservation programs that would save up to $20 billion and impact about 10% of farms, the largest 10% of farms. The next provisions address subsidies to private insurance companies and to insurance agents. It would cap the subsidies to insurance agents at $900 million per year. And presently, in statute, there is a 14.5% rate of return, so guaranteed profit rate, frozen for private insurance companies, and a provision that prevents RMA from negotiating that rate of return with private insurance companies. And so this bill would want to allow RMA to negotiate that and reduce that private rate of return to more accurately reflect market necessities to 8.9%. And that is per several government accountability office reports over the years, watched out for the federal government to report on wasteful spending, et cetera. That has consistently found that 14.5 rate of return is far above what's necessary and reflecting market conditions. They have also found the need for a means test, et cetera, in the federal crop insurance program. There's also provisions to guarantee anyone receiving crop insurance premium subsidies is actively engaged in farming on their land, so not absent landowners. And there are important data transparency measures to see who is receiving these federal crop insurance premium subsidies, and pertains to companies as well. So that's an important bill. And again, when we're talking about saving up to $35 billion, it's really important in a farm bill context because there's no new spending in the farm bill. In order to fund any programs, priorities, members of Congress need to negotiate among themselves which programs are going to take money from. And so it's important to see where wasteful spending exists to be able to use that money for other purposes. instead of pulling money from important conservation programs, research programs, local regional food system programs, or nutrition spending, right? Which are the only places this money could come from if you don't look at the wasteful spending within this program, which is, I've been told, the golden calf of agriculture to even consider. And finally, here is a reform that's not specific to crop insurance, but it is very relevant to this broader conversation about the safety net and structure of agriculture. And it's really emerging as a key issue in the Farm Bill. Commodity programs, like I mentioned earlier, do have a payment limitation. They do have a means test, but there are very significant loopholes that render them meaningless. And so this Farm Program Integrity Act, which was introduced by Senators Grassley and Senator Brown in late July, would close those loopholes in a meaningful way. Right now, a final rule that was finalized in late 2020, just before the beginning of the Biden administration, exempted all family farms from these actively engaged, or from requirements that farmers need to be actively engaged in farming to be eligible for subsidies. And USDA defines family farms as 98% of farms. So right now, there is no provision that you need to be actively engaged in farming to receive your $125,000 or $250,000 check for 98% of farms. And so that means that cousins and grandparents and siblings and all kinds of relatives, as defined in statute, are eligible for commodity program subsidies, whether or not they step foot on the farm. There's also, it makes sure that there's a maximum of $250,000 for farms with a spouse, right? Or $125,000 for single farmers going to one farm. And that language is important because at present, farms get around this payment cap by creating or separating their business into several paper farms, where, you know, oh, I have 10 farms, right? And you can receive a $125,000 or $250,000 payment on each of those farms, even if it's one farming operation. So this cracks down on that particular loophole, and it strengthens actively engaged requirements. And it requires 1,000 hours of labor and management in any combination to be considered actively engaged, to really make sure that, again, it's farmers working on their land who are receiving these subsidies and earning those subsidies. And so, again, I referenced that this is a really important, commodity programs is emerging as an important fault line in the Farm Bill, specifically with regard to raising what's called reference prices. So this can get wonky and in the weeds quickly, and I'll give you the high level as we close out here. But there are two key commodity programs, the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program and the Price Loss Coverage Program. These programs are only available to farmers of covered commodities, which includes corn and wheat and soybeans, peanuts, cotton, rice, dairy. I might have missed one or two, but those are the key commodity crops that are eligible for commodity program price supports and revenue supports. No specialty crops are eligible for these federal subsidies. And so within the price loss coverage program, there are in statute price floors defined for each of those covered commodities. So if the commodity price falls below that price floor enshrined in statute, it triggers a payment to make up the difference for these commodity farms, right? And again, that's in addition to the loss of the indemnity they'll receive from federal crop insurance program. That's in addition to disaster assistance spending. This is a whole separate program to support those farmers from losing their revenue. And so in this Farm Bill, it's emerging as a key priority of most commodity groups to raise those reference prices. And doing so, right, would cost tens of billions of dollars, or could cost tens of billions of dollars, and impact or help less than 6,000 farms. Those benefits would be concentrated mostly in the South because it's mostly growers of peanuts and cotton, and rice who enroll in the price loss coverage program. And so tens of billions of dollars to impact or to help about 6,000 farms, right? When these programs are supposed to be a safety net to protect farmers in moments when they really need it and not a profit guarantee, right? Freezing the reference prices at current record high commodity prices, right, would guarantee that when commodity prices inevitably level out and fall, those farmers would receive a payment every year, right? And that's not the intention of these programs. Again, it's supposed to be a safety net to protect farmers against unforeseen losses, not big winners and losers. And so that is wrapping up the issues, implications with climate, opportunities for reform that are moving right now in Congress. And so I think there's some time for Q&A, but I'll hand it over to y'all to see what's next.
Billy, awesome. I just learned a ton of stuff. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's have some time for Q&A. Folks, feel free to just jump on, unmute, and ask your questions. I'm going to start with one question, Billy, regarding, I follow NSAC's newsletter and have learned a lot every week. I learn from y'all's newsletter. Just want to give a plug there for folks who want to stay connected and sign up for that to see what y'all are working on regularly on these different issues.
Thank you. Yes, if you aren't signed up for the newsletter, you can do that by going to our website. It's a constant upload of the different blogs that are moving, that we're posting about what's moving in the farm space, farm policy space here in DC.
I have another question. You mentioned the cap on spending in the farm bill on the second to last bill you were talking about. Are you talking about over the 5 years for each farm bill? Like, what do you mean? Like these savings provide opportunities for other programs to get some more money? Is that because of the 5 years it's kind of established what the spending is, and then we're in a new opportunity with this new 2023-2024 farm bill?
Right. So there is the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, project spending for the Farm Bill every 5 years on a 10-year projection. And so that spending cap, right, is, adjusted with inflation, et cetera, but there's no new pot of, here's an extra $500 billion to spend in this farm bill. It's always in like the same amount of money, just adjusted for real spending levels. And so the 2023 farm bill is projected to cost, and so there's an effective cap of, I believe, $1.4 trillion over 10 years. When we're thinking about that spending, about 4/5 of that is nutrition programs, so SNAP. And about 1/5 of that total $1.4 trillion is actually programs to support agriculture production. Of that 1/5, about 2/3 is commodity programs and crop insurance subsidies. Most of it is crop insurance subsidies. And then the last third is conservation programs, mostly conservation programs, and then an extremely small sliver for research and local regional food system programs, urban ag, programs to support beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers. Very small sliver. That's the effective breakdown. And so again, when we're thinking about these programs funneling resources to the largest and wealthiest farms, right, and farms who, if we're looking at market realities, have the ability to purchase insurance if it was offered, right, then right, there's an opportunity to really shift resources to invest in farms to, improve their resilience, right, and whatnot. So
great.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? We got some little bit of dismay in the chat regarding just how big these issues are, and some appreciation for the work that y'all are doing to address them.
Yeah, they're big issues, and all commodity groups and a bipartisan consensus in Congress, right, generally default to keep things as they are, and so we are trying, right, to really uplift the narrative that, hey, most farmers do not benefit from this at all, right? And so who are these federal programs really designed to support, and who should they be designed to support, is a narrative that we're really trying to drum home, and need more folks to engage with, and amplify, because these are really complex issues. Very quickly you can get into the weeds, and I tried to keep it high level, but because of that, I think it keeps a lot of players in this space from engaging more directly. And it's just an accessibility issue, right? The language, the statute, all of that. It's hard to engage with and to be able to speak out about, especially when crop insurance just feels so out of reach for most farmers. Yeah.
Sarah.
Oh, well, Megan had her hand up too, and she might have had it up before me. So I've been having to do other stuff, but I've been listening. And I'm thinking about how sometimes, so the part on the bills especially, I didn't get to hear as much. So I apologize if I'm asking a question that you already answered. But I think one of the things that we have seen is that with some of these legacy programs, figuring out like a little niche, a little crumb, like a little foot in the door to providing resources for groups that are left out of these legacy systems is sometimes a way to start developing alternative resources that can eventually be something we point to as a substitution if we can continue to grow it more. So I just kind of was wondering about that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That is the philosophy of the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and that has been the roadmap for the sustainable ag movement and policy for decades. So you're so right that is, it's key, right? And we can point to conservation programs, we can point to LAMP, we can point to urban ag, we can point to all of these different programs that only exist because of our advocacy over the years that can point to, right, an alternative. And so within the federal crop insurance program, we discussed more about the whole farm revenue protection program, Sarah, while you were away. But that is a key crop insurance program that was designed for diversified farms in mind, that just needs some pretty fundamental improvements in its design and implementation. But, right, should those fundamental barriers be removed to that program, there's really an opportunity for that model to be expanded dramatically and more accessible to all farms. So when we think about getting our foot in the door and we think about that niche, we really do see the whole farm revenue protection as the best shot that we have right now at enrolling as many producers as want to be into the safety net.
So if there's one takeaway for us, as like for me, as somebody who's not an expert and is involved in agriculture and doesn't use crop insurance, I'm just thinking, is the one takeaway that efforts to reform that multi-peril big bucket piece is the most important approach right now?
So fundamentally, right, nothing will change so long as resources continue to be funneled to the largest conventional monoculture farms. And so those reforms about, right, implementing, right, just expanding or applying payment limitations and means tests to these farms, payment limitations and mean tests that exist for other agriculture programs, right, that fundamentally might be most important to create actual market incentives for these farmers to adopt conservation practices and to free up resources for really investing at the level that's needed in conservation programs, local regional food system programs, and expanding insurance access to farmers who need it.
Amazing. Awesome. Billy, thank you so much for sharing your depth and really
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. We look forward to staying connected, and this is going to be my go-to presentation to send to folks when they start asking questions about crop insurance. So I'm so happy that you did this and that we have this resource now. So thank you so much, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Many thanks, y'all. Cheers.